Just a reminder before I start that you can play most of my videos at 1.5 times speed, and that I make my videos now with chapters, and if you scroll on the timeline below the video, the names of the chapters will show, and you can navigate forward or backward to any chapter that you would like to see. Okay, then let's get going. This is AndyTube, and this video is about the feed dog on a Singer Model 1591. And by the way, it is a feed dog singular and not feed dogs plural. And Singer called it a feed dog because it feeds the fabric past the needle bar when there's a needle bar in the machine, right? I happen to have mine out, you know, but it would be here, and the feed dog would feed or pull the fabric past the needle. And dog is in the mechanical definition, it's like a mechanical device or a part that holds or grips or fastens, and it usually has a spikes or a bar or a hook. So feed dog. And that movement of the feed dog past the hook is controlled by the feed regulator, and the feed regulator is in the upright of the machine and back behind this indicator plate. And the feed regulator is controlled by the stitch length lever or stitch length control lever. And you think of this, you know, if you're used to this type of a lever, that you bring it down for the longest stitch that you want to make, or the machine can make, and then as you move it up, the stitch gets shorter and shorter. And what that's doing is changing the position of the feed regulator on a shaft that goes down and connects to a feed rock shaft and feed lift shaft that comes over and connects to a feed bar, and the feed dog is screwed into the top of that feed bar. Okay, so on this particular model, the longest is 6 stitches per inch. That's the longest stitch, and it's about 4.25 millimeters each stitch. So the feed bar would be moving the fabric 4.23 millimeters between needle penetration and coming out, right? And then the shortest, very nice, actually this machine can do as many as 30 stitches per inch, which is less than a millimeter long stitch, like a 0.85. And that's a real fine stitch. And going up past that point on this machine puts the feed regulator and the feed dog into a reverse movement, or what we call reverse sewing. And how this works is, for normal sewing, you set your stitch length, and you run your motor, and everything is moving, and this feed dog runs on like an elliptical pattern, a flat-sided elliptical, actually, where the curves are on each end. So it comes up at the front here, and then levels out and moves flat to the back, and then dips down for the back elliptical and runs flat back up to the front. Curves up, grabs the fabric, pulls it to the back. The dog drops, meaning it's not moving the fabric during the needle penetration and removal, because you don't want your fabric moving when the needle is in it, or you break the needle. You can bend the needle and bend it away from the hook point, so you get a skipped stitch and so forth. So there's a feed timing to the needle bar, just like there's a needle bar to hook timing. That feed bar set at the right height and the right timing, the way the machine is made, to not be moving the fabric, or just barely residual movement when it drops down while the needle is in there. Now, when we put this machine into a reverse and it changes the angle and function of that feed regulator, now the direction of the feed dog is different. It comes up in the back, it curves up, and then here it comes up, and then it runs flat across to pull the fabric from the back to the front, drops down for needle penetration and moves back, comes up in the back again and moves the fabric to the front, which we call reverse sewing or back tacking. So it's ingenious, but it's very, very simple. Now, I've had my videos up over 5 years, and I've got almost 600 of them, so naturally I get comments and I get emails, and often they have something to do about the feed system. But during the pandemic, this COVID, man, it's been going on a long time, hasn't it? I think about it. More people got interested in sewing, and of course a lot of those people were interested in a vintage Singer machine. Maybe they got one from a family member, or they found one at a garage sale or a thrift shop. Some people found them in sitting out on the curb to be hauled away, and all the inquiries I got increased. There was a point I was getting, between emails and comments, maybe 75 or 100 a day. Whew. Yeah, we were all busy, even though we were stuck at home. So, some of them were the feed dog. I can see it down in there, but it doesn't come up. Or I see it moving and it comes up, but it doesn't come up very high, and it doesn't pull my fabric good. Or how high are these teeth supposed to come up? Because mine are pretty high up and they're damaging the fabric on the bottom. Are they, when the every time it comes up, it makes my pressure bar jump up and down real loud and things like that. So fortunately, on this type of machine, most of the problems were just adjustments or lack of knowledge of use, things like that, or they just needed a cleaning. So one of the things that was common was a lot of people didn't know that this machine has a feature called drop feed, or feed drop, or drop dog, or as my grandma would say, dog in the ditch. That was her term for it. And in the instruction book, it would say, turn the machine back on its hinges, because it's usually sitting in a wood base or mounted in a Singer cabinet or combination table. Mine was ruined during shipping, so I'm just going to lay it back on the back side there. Get it up here closer. And these parts right here are used to drop the feed or lower the feed dog or drop the dog. This thumb screw is what keeps the feed bar up at the normal height for sewing. Okay, and then when you want to lower the feed dog, you turn this thumb screw counterclockwise. Mine was so stiff, I tried penetrating oil and heat and everything, and I finally put a thin piece of leather on here and grabbed it with pliers and turned it a little. And but when you turn it all the way out, it kind of stops. What it's doing is lowering this part of the crank. It's called the crank, and that changes the angle of the feed bar, so it kind of drops it down, so the dogs are at an angle, but they're below the needle plate, so they can't touch the fabric. Now when you run the machine, they're still moving and they're elliptical, but because they're below the needle plate, they have no effect on the fabric. And you might want to lower the feed dog to do free motion sewing is the most common thing. Like maybe you're darning some of your kids' jeans, or you're patching up a hole, or nowadays so many people craft with their machines. Maybe you're putting your fabric in a couple of hoops to stretch it, and you are moving it with your hands, free motion sewing. So the needle bar is going up and down and threads going in, but you're moving it maybe to follow a pattern. Maybe your quilting square has got a flower, and a little bee over here. So you're moving that to follow a little pattern of flower petals or a leaf or whatever. It's called a free motion sewing. Now some people, and I have seen this in person, they can even monogram like that by moving the fabric in little tiny increments and stitches very close together, what we call satin stitch, and put an initial or a name. In the Philippines, I saw a guy very skilled. He must have been about 75 years old, and he had a model 66 straight stitch, and he was putting people's names on these tourist hats from the Philippines, baseball hats or sun hats for the ladies. And he charged $5 to monogram your name, and people were paying him just to see him do that. It was quite amazing. Anyway, if you can see this at all, you see now that I have lowered, since this isn't in a base, I have to elevate it a little bit so the parts on the bottom don't hit the workbench, and I can rotate. So I have this in forward sewing, but with the dog down, you may be able to see the dog moving front to back here, but it's not coming up to grab the fabric. Okay, so a lot of times that was easy. I get an email, and some people send videos and stuff, and hey, this thing's broken, it won't come up and grab the fabric, and you look at what model of machine they have and see if it has a drop feed and where the mechanism is. So in a case like this machine, I would say, hey, go down here and see how this part is even up here, and the thumb screw is backed out. Push it down to raise the feed bar up, and screw that thumb screw back in all the way. You don't have to killer tight, just put it in there firmly, And now your feed bar will be raised back up, and it'll let the teeth of the feed dog come up above the needle plate, and it should be able to start moving your fabric now. See that? Yeah, you can see it's right up there now. Okay. Ta-da! So that sometimes is a very easy fix for people. Okay. Now, the height of a feed dog has a factory specification. Okay. And many of these vintage machines are about the same. Some are a little different. But usually nothing happens on the machine to put that height too low, you know, to disturb the height. Usually once it's set at the factory, when the machine's built and tested, it's like that's it. In my experience, the only time that they are not at the right height is because somebody, well, maybe somebody before had lowered the feed dog, played with that thumb screw, didn't see what it was doing, and left it partially tightened. So this is low, right? But somebody has loosened the clamping screw and, you know, played with it and didn't get it at the right height. Or somebody even replaced the feed dog and didn't know how to set the height on it, you know, played around. So you can check the height of the dog, and if it is too high or too low, it doesn't want to pull fabric properly, and also you know, the needle, the presser bar foot only goes up so high, and if the dog you know, is up too high, you lose space under there. You can't sew as thick, and when the dog hits the presser foot, it's really jarring to the presser bar and the presser foot. And I've even found machines with broken springs in the presser bar from that slamming. And if it's too low, even though people maybe will increase the pressure regulator on the presser bar, you know, like in this case, it's that thumb screw up here, you tighten and it puts more and more pressure on the spring and the presser bar, but they still can't quite get a good movement of the fabric. It might be too low. And all the presser feet and all the attachments are made to operate properly with the feed dog at a certain height. So normally you want to have that feed dog at the factory height, or pretty darn close, you know. You want to do just normal maintenance on your feed dog. One of the things you should do when you're done sewing for the day is take 30 seconds and take a lint brush and just brush off your needle bar and brush off the tension unit, get any lint out, and brush this area off with the feed dog. Okay? And because there's teeth in the, you know, there's a V shape, and the lint and stuff will get impacted between the teeth. And in this particular case, there's rows of teeth. There's two shorter rows here with a little space in between, and then a longer row. But lint will get impacted in there. So it's a good idea once in a while to take like an old toothbrush, turn your hand wheel so that your teeth come up to their high point, which is in about the middle of their span, how far they move, and give it a good brushing with a nylon brush, a stiffer brush, Now, I've had people who will use a metal brush, detail brush, but that can scratch up your needle plate pretty good. So we'll get into a deeper cleaning later. But you want to keep that clean, and really it just takes a few seconds when you're done sewing. So the next time you set your machine up and you want to do a project, you know, you're clean. But you can do more than that by removing the needle plate and getting better access to the feed dog. So this needle plate just has 4 screws, and see if that's pretty stiff there. So we'll just put in a screwdriver here and get these screws loose. Then we can just use the screwdriver tip usually to spin them out. Do this by finger then. And then this plate is just going to lift up and off, and you can brush out that area because it does get lint and dirt, you know. Sometimes you get a drop of oil from the needle bar or the presser bar, gets on those teeth and goes down inside, and then that really makes lint and dirt and dust stick to them and attract more. Once you get some lint built up, it seems to, you know, like a dust bunny turning into a dust buffalo. You ever heard that? Anyway, you just lift this up now and off, and your needle plate will come right off, okay? And then we can see into here and see better. And I do see some lint and dust built up in here. Now I have had machines so impacted they couldn't sew because there was so much impacted lint, like around this feed bar, that it would hit the bottom of the casting there, and it couldn't get through its rotation. You know, there, you see that? So once in a while you want to get get in here and get under the machine, and here's a little bit stuck under the needle plate between those 2 rows of teeth. So we're getting a pretty good accumulation of stuff there. So with this off now, you can get in here better and clean around the top of the hook area and the feed bar. You see those 2 screws there? That's what holds the feed dog to the feed bar. Let's see if I got one of my bottle brushes here that'll fit in there. Yeah, I bought a set of about 8 or 10 of these different sizes for like $6, $7 on Amazon a while back, and they're softer. They're not real stiff, but for getting lint and cleaning and stuff like that, they're very, very handy. So I'm going to move this feed dog so it goes a little more to the back in the rotation, and then I can get in here better. And then I'll keep turning it so it comes up to the towards the front, and give me just a little bit more room down in here. And now you can really get after these teeth good, you know, to brush them out. And if you wanted to use a I got one here. If you wanted to use a little brass or steel detail brush, you can do it like this without worrying about scratching your needle plate or the paint on your machine. You know, usually these machines have some pretty good scratches anyway from wear, and they show up pretty good on this black paint, don't they? So you should you know, do that once in a while to get that area cleaned out. And the other thing you want to do is be sure this recessed area here where the needle plate sits on is free of built up stuff too, so that the needle plate sits flat, sits level and proper. So I usually do my wife's machine in the summer because there's a lot of days that, you know, you just don't want to go out much because it's so hot. And I'll just pick a day and, you know, maybe a time and take like her 301 or 403A, and I'll even take it out of the cabinet. She has them in cabinets. And clean them up real good, wipe off, brush off old oil and stuff, put fresh oil, and clean these all up around the hook, you know, around the hook down here, and the feed dog area and under the needle plate. But if you want to take this off to do any more cleaning, you can. You really should test it, because you may not, you know, people say, oh, I'm having fabric movement problems, this is so old, I better replace this. And they buy a used one and are on eBay, or they buy a newly made aftermarket one online. And then they take the existing one out, put the new one in, and it doesn't help what their problem was, you know. But these can get worn. They're very strong, but the little teeth can get worn and stuff. So you just get your feed dog testing tool and give it a test before you decide to change it, you know. And you don't even have to take the needle plate off or anything. Just turn your hand wheel so that it's at the high spot, and then get your feed dog testing tool. Let me grab mine. There it is. There it is. Almost everybody has one. And you just take your finger and run it on those teeth of the feed dog. And you should feel like pointy edges on the top of those teeth. And if they don't grab your skin, if they don't pull on it, and you don't have to push down real hard, you know, just rest your finger on there and drag it across. And if you feel that pointy edginess grabbing your finger, your dog is okay. It's not going to hurt anything. If you want to use a, you know, like a piece of fabric, if you have some scrap fabric, here's just an old t-shirt, you can do that. You hear that? You know, and you can make sure that it's grabbing the fabric, that those teeth are grabbing it. And you go both ways, because you know, if you want to sew in reverse or back tack, it's going to be pulling the fabric. Yeah, so that dog is okay. That's an easy way to test your dog while you clean it, make sure it doesn't need to be replaced. There's nothing wrong with it. But I'm going to show you how to take it out anyway. So just so that you know, so someday if you decide to change the feed dog, you'll know how to do it. So you just have to loosen and loosen and remove those 2 screws. Is all you got to do. Now these, like, I don't put my needle plate screws in real hard. I use the screw tip and put them in as hard as I can just by hand. But these need to be put in pretty firmly because they take a lot of wear and tear. And they can be tricky to remove. And to me, these screws, I don't know why, but these screws seem a little soft to me. And I've seen a lot of beat up feed dog screws where they're stripped or the opening is bent. So you want to get a good fitting, darn it, I'm trying to do this from behind the camera. You want to get a good fitting screwdriver and go in and get them started out of there if they're real tight to begin with. And you can put penetrating oil on them first and stuff. Now this one is pretty firm. There we go. I use this little mini ratchet. If you've watched some of my videos, you've probably seen it. Chapman Tool Company, because they use these hollow ground tips that are like flat-sided. They're not a wedge like normal screwdrivers you just get at the hardware store. They're made for gunsmithing and things like that. So I just go to the Chapman Manufacturing Company, and I bought one of their smaller sets, you know, and you get a handle. They come in all kinds of colors now too and stuff. You get a handle, you get the extension, and then you get however many bits you want, and you can buy bits separate for $1 or $2. You know, that's it. And they include the mini ratchet too, with a set like that. And you just flip over, and this lets you put about 3 times the torque. So I like them here because it can be hard to get a screwdriver down past the nose, you know, and I think that's what happens is people get a regular screwdriver in there at an angle and twist it, and it strips out the slot. I think is what happens a lot. So once I get them loose, I'll just take the screw bit, like, and you know, twist them out of there. Then I can get my fingertips on them and finish that up. And that's it. That's how you're going to take it off. And then you can really clean it. If it's a mess, if you're like restoring a machine and it's weird and stuff, you can take it off and scrub it. You can put it in the ultrasonic cleaner or your little ultrasonic jewelry cleaner, you know, and really get it cleaned up and stuff if you want. Or you can, if you have one that's worn out and your teeth are kind of rounded off and not doing a good job for you, you can replace it. See, there's some gunk under there. So I'll clean this with my little spray bottle of crud cutter cleaner, and you know, it'll just take a second, and brush it off, and there's the feed bar. See the top of that feed bar? See how it's moving there? Yep, just like that. That's all there is to it. So, let me get this started back in here now, whether I'm putting the old one or the new one back in. And when I go to finish up the installation, I'll come back and show you just a couple things to, check for where mistakes I've made in the past. And if I tell you about them, maybe you can avoid making them. They're just minor things, and you'd figure it out. But I might be able to save you some time or frustration. Okay, here's what I wanted to show you. Now, I put my screws back in the feed dog into the feed bar, but not all the way, not even snugged up finger tight. See how I've left the dog a little bit loose here? The reason I've done that is before I would, install the feed dog, and I'd like tighten this screw all the way down tight because it was easier to get to, and then I'd go tighten this one and put stuff back together. And later when I was testing machine, I would hear like a little zing zing, like a little metal scrape, and I thought it was like a bent needle, or I had set the timing wrong, or the needle was scraping the hole in the needle plate, or scraping the side of the hook, something like that. And I'd fuss around with all that and I'd not find it. And it turns out it would be scraping on one of these slots on the needle plate. So that's when I changed my method, where I leave this a little bit loose, and then I showed you before, be sure and have this area all cleaned out and smooth. Then I'll set my needle plate in that recessed area and push it up. Now, I don't put in the screws. I just get it where I can see it's in place, and then I wiggle this around and be sure that I am in the slots. So that seems to line it up. And then I'll carefully lift this up without moving the dog. And now I'll go in and tighten these, but kind of like you do when you change a tire on a car and you have all those lug nuts on the tire to the wheel, where you tighten each one a little bit and you go back and forth so that the wheel sits firmly on the drum, so to speak. So that's what we want here, is we don't want this to be a little cockeyed, because the clearance between those slots is very, very close. Now, once I've firmed it up as tight as I can with my fingers, I'll just check it again. Put it on there. If I had the motor on the machine, I don't have this, but I would go ahead and run it and see if I can hear any metal on metal sound, or of course if your plate moves, you're way off, But now I'm assured that it's going to be lined up. So then I'll do a final tightening, and I think I mentioned a little bit ago where you want these to be good and firm, because they take a beating. They get a lot of work out. and they move up and into the presser bar, which has a spring in it, and the presser foot, and you know, that's pushing down, so they're always kind of slapping together. And even though the sewing machines run very well, there still is vibration. So you don't want these to work loose over time. Don't go crazy, because someday you might want to take them off, you know. But nice and firm. Very nice. Okay. Okay. Then I'll go ahead and put on the needle plate and the needle plate screws. And these I do not tighten down nearly as hard, because it's just not required in my opinion. Some people have really cranked these down, and you know, I'm much more likely to take the needle plate off for cleaning and stuff than I'll take the feed dog off occasionally or rarely. So these I will kind of, you know, I have a tip like this, and I'll just do them finger tight as I can get them with just my fingers. But if you get a screwdriver in there, you don't have to really crank these down. Just firm. I know it's, you know, it's like my idea of firm versus your idea of firm, right? But now that you know, you should take this needle plate off once in a while and get all of that lint and dirt and dust and stuff out of there. You'll appreciate that you can get them pretty tight with your fingers, you know. And if you have arthritis or something like that, then go ahead and use, you know, go ahead and use a wrench or a screwdriver and snug them up. But you don't have to tighten them as hard as that feed dog. Perfect. Oh, look at that. Nice and clean, and everything clean inside. So, next in the video, I'm going to be showing you how to check and set the height using blades from a feeler gauge. Is how I do it. And I'll show you a method for doing that, and where the adjustment screws are and stuff like that. So you don't want to miss that. Alright, let's talk about checking the height of the feed dog. Now, I have mentioned before that you know, all the machines that Singer made, they have a kind of a factory setting for the height of the feed dog. And that's, you know, that's to move the fabric properly, and that's so that all the attachments will work properly. And when we're talking about the height of the feed dog, we mean the distance from the top of the needle plate to the very tip top of the teeth. That's the spacing that you measure, okay? And when you want to check the height or reset the height if it's off, most of the service manuals that I have for Singer talk about setting the stitch length lever towards the middle of the range of stitches. So depending on the model, it might say set this at 12, set this at 14. You know, in this case, we talked that the stitch length can go from 6 stitches to 30 stitches. So I'm going to set it at 15, which what they're looking for is the middle range. Now, the service manual, or the adjuster's manual is what they call it for this model 1591, it does not say to do that. But I'm just doing it because I've done it on so many other models, and it makes sense to me. Okay, then you want to turn your hand wheel so that your feed dog comes up to the highest point that it comes up. So it's going to come up in the front, and it's going to hit top height and then stay level, and then towards the end of the rearward movement it's going to drop down. So when it comes up and levels out, that's the top height. Okay, now it does talk in the adjuster's manual about what the height is, and the highest, they say no more than, so the highest setting is 3/64 of 1 inch, which would have a decimal of 0.046 inches, which is also equal to about 1.19 millimeter. Now I'm going to put up a slide with that information, and I'll mark it as a chapter, so if you want to come back later, it'll say factory height. And I'll also put this in the description below the video. So if you want to read it at the top of the description below the video, I'll put that the very first thing. Okay. Now, I use a feeler gauge to check or set the height. And this is a very common feeler gauge, F-E-E-L-E-R, feeler. And these different little pieces of metal, I've always called them blades, and they are all different thicknesses for the range of feeler gauge that you buy. Some have narrower, thinner pieces, and some are thicker depending on what they're made to measure. This is a pretty common one, and I've removed a couple of blades from the gauge, and that's what I'm going to be using for measuring. And I've taken a 0.035 inch and a 0.011 inch, which gives me the total of the 0.46, the 0.046, and that's the maximum height. So when I measure this or set it, it cannot be any higher than that. We don't want it to be any higher, okay? And the way that we're going to test it is just to put our feeler gauge blades flat up on the needle plate, up against the teeth, and then we're going to see if the teeth are higher than that. That's the first thing. If they're higher than that, you know they're too high. They're higher than the factory, maximum factory recommendation, so we don't want that. If they're lower than that, it depends on how much lower they are, if it's good enough for you or if you feel it's too low and you want to adjust it. And adjusting is not that hard on this machine. So to test it, I just take a blade. I take, you know, something sharp, and here's a nice new knife I was sent from a friend, and I'm going to put that up there, and then I'm going to just put the blade at an angle and try and slide it off the feeler blades like that, and it doesn't go. You see that? It hits the teeth and it stops. So those teeth are higher than the factory recommended setting, which we don't want. So we're going to adjust it. Okay? Now, the other thing that the adjuster's manual says is that the space between the teeth should be slightly lower than the top of the needle plate. So let me, here's a direct quote. The feed dog should be so adjusted that when it reaches its highest position, slightly less than the full depth of the feed dog teeth will project through the slots in the throat plate. Oh, okay. And I've had other manuals tell me that. And the way I've always took that to be is the teeth are cut in a V shape at the bottom. And what they're saying is that this V, bottom of the V, has to be below the needle plate. Can't be above, has to be slightly below, whatever slightly is in your world. So that's why I've always used the feeler gauge and measured from the top of the teeth to the top of the needle plate. Okay? So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to take some painter's tape. Now I've tested this tape on another place on the machine and put it on and left it on for 24 hours and pulled it off to make sure it didn't damage this black finish. Okay, so that's what I'm going to use, is just Scotch, what I call painter's tape. You know, it's not real sticky. So, but I want to. This is my way of doing it now. I want to tape this down firmly in place, because I have to turn the machine over on its back to get access to the clamping screw to move the crank to adjust these lower. Okay, and in the past I would kind of try and hold them like this, and I would turn the machine over and do the adjustment, and then try and hold this in place and look over the top and see how am I doing. But a couple of times lately I've tried a different way, and I'm going to show you that. Okay, and if you don't like it, don't use it. You know, hold it with your hand. But usually I've got metal, you know, steel on steel, and when you're turning it over and stuff, and it's sliding around, and it's kind of a pain. So I decided one time, why didn't I just tape that down, and at least I won't have to be worried about it moving. So I'm just going to tape it down, and then I'll show you how we can turn it over and the way I adjust the height to get that 0.046 inch. Okay, so I've got it taped down, and I feel it's secure. So let's flip this over now, and I'll show you. We already talked in the video about lowering the feed dog, right? To lower it or drop the dog or put it in the ditch. So when you go to check it and set it, you want to be sure that this is screwed all the way in to put your feed bar and feed dog at the normal height. The normal height for sewing. Now, right up here is a clamping screw. And when you adjust the height and you want to keep it there, you tighten this screw to hold it in place. And that holds the crank here. So when you're going to adjust it, you have to loosen the clamping screw. And it doesn't surprise me the teeth are high, because I know somebody worked on this before, because there's a chunk of the screw slot broken off right there. And that's a pattern of when somebody turned it left and didn't use a hollow ground screw that's flat, screw driver that's flat. So anyway, I'm going to turn this and loosen it. See how everything moved there? Okay, so we're moving the crank, which is moving the feed bar, which is moving the teeth. Maybe I can get over here, and I don't know if I can. Maybe I can move this and show you. There, see how the teeth went down? See, the feed dog teeth? So that's what moving that crank does. And you have to loosen that clamp to move the teeth. To move everything, you have to loosen the crank. So I got it loose now, but instead of going back and forth, here's what I've been doing. I will put it down, which raises the teeth all the way up, and I'm going to partially tighten the clamp to make this hard to move, but still movable if I push on it. So let's turn it over now and work on the top, because the teeth are definitely up too high now. Okay? So what I want to do is lower these teeth so they're even with my blades. And I don't want to use my finger because you know, the teeth will go up into it. So I just have something hard. I have a hard flat piece of plastic. You could use one of the heavier feeler gauge blades if you wanted, or a piece of wood, or something that's just flat, okay? And you're going to want to put it on your feeler gauge and hold it there, and then push it down, okay? So now the top of the teeth are equal with the top of the presser bar. We should get a slide off here. Yep. Okay, and now we'll go back and we will tighten the clamping screw to keep that setting. Okay, I'll tighten it about 90% there. And that's what should give us the correct maximum height. Okay? So if we line up everything here and we check the blade, see how it slides right off. Now coming back the other way, it barely catches. So I might have the tip a little tiny bit below, like instead of 0.046, maybe they're 0.045, but that is acceptable to me, because the maximum is the 0.046, and they were too high. So now that I've double checked and I like everything, I'm going to go ahead and finish clamping that clamping screw, tighten it up very hard. So it is permanently going to hold it there now. Okay, is checking and resetting the height of the feed dog, in this case, using some feeler gauge blades and some tape and something hard and flat. In this case I just used a flat plastic block, you know, and that's it. Now, okay, just when you thought that you were done, and you can be done with the video if you want, if you've seen what you want to see. But those of you who are interested with one more adjustment on the feed dog of model 1591. I'll show it to you. And that adjustment is the feed dog can be adjusted lengthwise at the needle plate. And this one is off. And I looked at the bottom and there's a clamping screw missing from the machine, so I know besides somebody playing with the height, they played with the lengthwise adjustment. And I have seen this before when people have a problem with the feed regulator or the stitch length lever is bent and they're not getting the length of stitch they think they should be getting. You know, maybe they set it to the long stitch 6 per inch, but they're only getting about 10. So, and in that case, it's maybe because the stitch length lever up here has been bent inside at the regulator. So even though it hits the indicator plate bottom, the regulator itself isn't bottomed out. But people think, you know, what you see is the feed dog, and they see the stitching results, so they think something's wrong with the feed dog, so they start investigating and turning screws and stuff like that. So I can tell it's off because what you want on the feed dog is when it comes up in the front, you want it to be as close to the front opening of the slot of the needle plate without hitting the needle plate, but you want it very close, and you want it to be able to come as far forward as it can and push up the fabric against the pressure foot and stabilize it while you're making your stitch, and then move it the length that you've set before it drops down. And when I was looking at this before, it doesn't come up to the front at all, really. You know, if I turn it, we'll see it come up like right there, and there's a big space right here and a very big space there. So I said, okay, you know, that's off. And when I looked at the bottom, and then I found the clamping screw where you adjust all that length is gone. I said, okay, that's making sense to me. And this machine I'm very interested in because it has a third row of teeth. It has this middle row right here that's right behind the needle hole for the needle to go through. And I'm thinking maybe that is why this machine is known for such a beautiful stitch, because they not only stabilize the fabric, these feed dogs, but that middle row comes up very close to the needle itself, and that is going to prevent the fabric shifting, you know, or puckering. So I said, oh, that's my, maybe people tell me it has such a beautiful stitch. Okay, so we see the problem here, right? And also you can see how it goes way back here and almost hits the back of the needle plate. That's wrong too. See, it's not making a very long stitch pull, and I have it set all the way at 6. So it's kind of opposite. The front end of the dog should be coming up very close to these plates here, and especially the middle, and then it should be going down before it gets to the end of the needle plate. So let me show you on the bottom here where that adjustment takes place. I have to turn this over, and let's see, can we see it pretty clearly? Should I put it up on, I think you can see it without me putting it up on the block. So first off, well, let me show you a close-up picture just in case. Okay, so we see that this is the eccentric adjusting screw right here, where the forked feed connection comes down and connects here and over to the lifting and rocking the feed bar. That connection, a lot of times, well, like look up here, it's just a screw, right? And then up at this one, it's just the regular screw where those things are connected. And see down here, it's just like a hinge screw so that the bar can move a little bit. But this one, you notice it's kind of different. It's a much more shallow head, and it's bigger, and that's because it's an eccentric screw, meaning it's not centered perfectly round. It has kind of a high side, and that allows you to turn the screw and make the feed dog move a little bit forward or backward. Okay, and the idea is that right here, if you saw the picture, here's the hole for the clamping screw but it's missing. But I think we can make this work because there's also a nut here that holds the eccentric screw. So when you would go to adjust this, you would loosen this nut that's holding the screw, and then you would loosen the adjusting screw, you know, the clamping screw for the adjustment. Then you would turn, usually you would turn this up towards this shaft. You would turn it clockwise, and then you can watch your feed dog move, and when you get it where you want, then you would come back and tighten that adjusting clamping screw, and you would tighten your nut. So we're just going to have to try loosening the nut and making the adjusting and figuring out how to keep that adjustment in place while we tighten the nut back up. That's usually what the clamping screw does. So this, we can use a wrench on, and it looks like a 3/8 to me, so let me grab a 3/8 inch wrench here. Now this is a combination wrench, for those of you that don't know, and it's got a boxed or closed end, and it has an open end. That's why they call it combination. You can get wrenches that are open on both ends or closed on both ends. So this is a combination. So we can put either end on here, and we can turn it to loosen that nut. Okay, so, and I'm going to treat this, if I had the clamping screw now, I would loosen this nut, and I would loosen that clamping screw enough that I could turn this with the screwdriver, but it would still be fairly hard to turn. Just kind of like we did with the clamping screw up here. I loosened it but kept it a little bit tight, so when I moved the clamp for the height, it wouldn't move around while I moved the machine. That's what you want to do here. You'd be loosening it and loosening the clamping screw, and you'd be turning this. Okay, so I'm going to loosen the nut enough that I can turn this. Yeah, see, this is usually turned up towards this other shaft. So let's see if that nut is loose enough that I can turn it. And this is horizontal, so what if I turn it up? not quite straight up. Let me turn it a little bit like that. And it's pretty stiff to turn, so I think that's going to stay there. And then I'll go back up. I've often wondered I should be able to rig up a mirror somehow. If you have a partner helping you on your adjustment, you know, you can have somebody watch this and tell you where you're at. So let me look at it now though. And oops, I gotta elevate the back of that machine so I can turn the hand wheel type. Let's see if that'll do it. Yep, let me get it over here and get it in sight of the camera. So that did bring it a little closer. Like I can't stick this in all the way, but there's still, it's still not up to the front. You want it as close to the front as you can get without hitting it. I'm trying to remember the model before I would adjust it all the way up till it hit the needle plate and then start turning it back. But this did move it some, but not enough. So I will go back under here to the eccentric and I'll just turn it some more. Oops, that's not it, it's down here. It's this one down here, and I will turn it. See, before it was like that, I turned it up to here. Let me turn it, see, we'll call that 12 o'clock, so let me turn it to about 2 o'clock. Semi-tighten it there, and we'll come back down here and look. And we'll see if that made any difference. Prop up the back end. You can see this wouldn't be that easy to do mounted in a cabinet unless you had somebody to help you. Oh, it's still blocked. I don't have it off of that. Off of that part back there to get it up off. There, let's try this. Does this move now? Yep. Okay. So, turning the hand wheel towards the front of the machine. Now it's even closer. And look at the space I have in the back where it should be. See there? Coming up closer. Dropping down. But it's a lot closer. Especially this one. But I think it can go some more. And again, I was told by the Singer guys that you want it as close to that front as it can go without hitting. So let's drop this back down a little bit here. Maybe I'll give you a better view of this, okay? So again, we went from say 9 o'clock, noon, 2 o'clock. Let me just go over to 3. So I'll turn this 180. The thing is, you don't want to rotate it and get the high side of that eccentric on the bottom, because then you're not really making adjustments. And I wonder if that is the case, because that's a pretty big adjustment. Normally doesn't have to be adjusted that much. So let's see if we got how this is looking now. Lift this up and get my lifting block under there. Turn it. Oh yeah, now that is nice. That is very nice now. That is right up, very close, that middle teeth and this one right up close. And you see how much space is left in the back when it starts to go down. See, before the teeth were almost hitting the back. So now they're coming up. Very nice. That is much more of a normal position. It's actually that's a very good adjustment. I'm happy with that. I think that's right about where it would have come from the factory. So, you know, I suppose that could get off a little bit from where, you know, these machines are pretty old, and if they've had a lot of use, you know, I suppose some of these parts could get a little bit worn, but that was a huge adjustment to make. So if you think yours is off and you adjust it, remember to turn it clockwise, and normally you'd only turn it like 1 or 2 o'clock. You know, if it was on line 9 like this, try 10 or 11. You know, yeah, well, I did. I went to 11 almost. So anyway, to have to turn it 180 degrees, that was a big adjustment. So somebody definitely played with it. So since this is where we want it now, on your machine, which has a clamping screw, right, you would come right up here to that clamping screw and tighten the heck out of it. And that squeezes that together and holds that in place. Then you would tighten the nut. I don't have the clamping screw, so I'm going to hold it, the position, with my screwdriver so that it doesn't turn. And then I'm going to tighten that nut nice and tight. And I'm going to probably tighten it more than I usually like to tighten parts on the machine, because I don't have a clamping screw to help hold that eccentric nut. Don't want to break anything. I do not, but I want it to be pretty good. So if anybody has an extra screw number 175 laying around, I could use one. That was the part number, 175. Okay, so let's just go back up one last time, make sure that I didn't let that move. I'm sure I didn't. I'm pretty good about that, but hey, I've made mistakes before. Go to the front, we go down, we come up, and it comes up nice and close to the front of the slots in the needle plate. Very nice. And don't forget, these front teeth, they're still slanted. You know, they're like an inverted V. So you're seeing the tooth up here, but the base of it on the dog is actually coming up under the edge of the needle plate. If you have your machine there, you'll see what I mean. Okay, how do you like that? And you don't have to do that too often, but when that's the problem, it's good to know that you can fix it and know how to fix it. The only other adjustment I can think of is some of the machines, like I think I've done this on the slant needle machines, the 400s and 500s. Some machines, the feed dog can be adjusted sideways to kind of be centered in that slot. And it's a tricky little adjustment, but it can be done. But this machine does not have that. This machine, we can only adjust the height and the lengthwise adjustment. And you just saw it. It wasn't hard to do at all. You could do that quite easily. So if you set your machine to 6 and you don't think you're getting 6 stitches per inch, you know, maybe you're getting 8 or 9 or 10, the first thing you want to do is check, take that plate off and see if this has been bent down, you know. And if that looks good, then you want to pay attention here to where that feed dog pops up in the front. How close is it? And I'll put it in reverse so we can see that. See, it's still away from the back, which is very normal, and then it goes to the front, and when it goes down it's very close. That's a very nice adjustment. Good job, Andy Tube. Alright, that's more than everything you ever wanted to know about the feed dog. Thanks for tuning in to that, and I hope you come back and see some more videos of Ike, my Singer Model 1591, or watch some of the other 550, 60, 70 videos on my channel. Take care of yourselves.